And that's where that moment happened with yourself, Jay White, and Juice Robinson. The Observer had this to say. During the White U.S. title defense against Juice Robinson, on several occasions, White whipped Robinson into the barricades. Unlike in most places where the barricades are hooked together and will move from a body being thrown into them, these barricades were not linked together.
Mm.
So when one guy would throw the other into the barricade would tumble over. They did it a few times, and White whipped Robinson into the barricade right in front of the announcers, Ross and Barnett. The barricade moving knocked Ross backwards out of his chair and he took a fall. Barnett then said something to the effect of, "You just fucked up," and then left the announcing position and chased White around the ring. Security, thinking it was part of the show, did nothing.
Yeah.
Live fans thought it was part of the show. It wasn't. Ross was in great pain flying home and checked himself into the hospital on July 9th. He was diagnosed with bruised ribs, a bruised sternum, and some lung issues that could possibly lead to pneumonia. With the rib injury, every movement was painful, and he had to cancel 3 commitments this week due to the injury. Ross was even more upset because the night before he'd said to New Japan officials to keep the talent away from doing stuff near the announcing position because they had to do that in Japan and the announcers usually scatter. So let's talk about that. Do you remember giving them a heads up ahead of time? Don't come over here. And was this the worst injury you ever had in wrestling?
Yeah, probably the worst. Yeah, I think so. I think so. Yeah, I remember having a conversation because I couldn't believe how the barricades were being constructed. They weren't being connected. And so this set up a very precarious scenario that came to fruition. So yeah, I mentioned it. Uh, but here's the thing you worry about as a broadcaster sitting at ringside is that you're going to lose your audio because somebody bumped into this, this got unplugged, what have you. It's very challenging. So I remember mentioning it, all the good it did me. Those kids got in the groove. They were all pumped up. There was a big crowd. It was a sold out crowd. It was a great atmosphere in the Cow Palace, and to be able to do something in the Cow Palace was kind of cool for that show. I thought because of the historic nature of San Francisco's Cow Palace. You know, the arena that made Pat Patterson and Ray Stevens uh, bigger than life. So it was a special place, a special time. But boy, I was lucky I could finish the show because it was hard because my ribs are all screwed up and I was having a hard time getting breaths. So, but we made it. You got to gut it out, you know. And as I said before, it ain't ballet.
Well, it changes just a few months later. The whole circumstance with Access, JR would be a topic in the Observer. Jim Ross and Josh Barnett will be gone after the next set of tapings. They're doing voiceovers for shows this week, which will be the last new shows of the year. Barnett is at this point out for good. We've had contradictory stories of the reasons, but obviously it is a New Japan decision or an Access decision, although the first word we got was it was the former. The situation with Ross isn't clear, but based on tweets by both Ross and Adam Swift of Access, where Swift thanked Ross, it looks like he won't be returning in April. 1 week ago, Ross was going to be out at the end of December because WWE was not going to allow him to sign a new deal with his deal ending at the end of the year.
Right.
But he was most likely to return in April when his WWE deal expired. Late last week, things changed behind the scenes. Based on tweets by both and other information we've received, it's most likely this next voiceover session, which will cover every show until the end of the year, will be the last show for both Ross and Barnett. Nobody has said anything, and Access officials have told us they expect to release information regarding the announcers going forward at some point in the next week. So, what happened? Why did this come to an end, your time with New Japan?
WWE's deal.
Yeah.
You know, they gave me the clearance to do all these projects that you outlined and you grocery listed a few minutes ago. But you know, I was under contract to them, and you know, there's always that caveat called WrestleMania that you want to be a part of. I saw online the other day where I'd call 17 WrestleManias. I didn't have a clue I had to call that many. That's a lot of calls.
It is.
That's a lot of shows. But WWE, when they kept Kevin Dunn kept in great communication with me. They knew my contract status at Access TV and Cuban's company, but they wanted me to be full time and not extend that arrangement. So I was not going to be able to extend in any event. So, but I never left there. There meaning L.A. and L.A. Live and Access TV and all that stuff. I never left there, uh, you know, upset or unhappy. It's just worked. It worked out great. That was one of the most working for Access TV, Adam Swift, and all these guys was one of the greatest pleasures of my professional life. It really was. I wouldn't have traded that experience for anything. And yes, it was daunting. This is challenging. You're in a little room, as I've outlined ad nauseum, but that's where we were. We made it work, and I had a great time. Those guys treated me like family. You know, for Mark Cuban to volunteer his private plane and to actually fly a neurologist to Norman was pretty magnanimous. That's pretty impressive. Unfortunately, she didn't last long enough to see what the second doctor's opinion was going to be, and just didn't work out. But the thought that he meaning Mark Cuban, tried to help me out in that moment was something I'll never forget, and I'll always admire him and appreciate Mark Cuban for that.
Well said. Michael was actually asking about that, if you had any interactions with Mark Cuban and what your thoughts were, but we know now. What we don't know, though, is a great question from Waddles. What would you say was your favorite match you called during the New Japan run?
It would probably be something involving Shinsuke Nakamura, because I thought he was the most mesmerizing talent I'd seen in years, maybe a generation, certainly in within the decade. I mean, he was so over, and he was so unique. His body, he's so flexible, and he worked stiff, and all that. You know, I've never thought I haven't seen that version in WWE yet, and I think that may be a missed opportunity somewhere where people look back on it. You can get a lot more mileage out of Shinsuke than maybe he's getting. That's just me being, you know, sideline booker. Uh, but Shinsuke and Okada, you could tell Okada was gifted and he had something special. Both those guys had amazing timing and crowd psychology, in-ring psychology. They had it, and they displayed it. They told great stories. They were unselfish with each other. So I would think Okada and Shinsuke were that match that we did at WrestleMania. What was it, 9 or not WrestleMania?
Wrestle Kingdom 9. Yeah, that was a fun one. I thought you were going to say Omega Okada. I know you were really high on that one when that one.
Oh, I was, yeah, but I didn't get to call that live.
No, you didn't call it live, but I think you did one on tape. Did you not?
Yeah, but it's a different deal, Connie. It's apple and an orange, so to speak. I got to call Okada and Shinsuke Nakamura live.
You actually called Shinsuke and Kota Ibushi live, and then Tanahashi and Okada. Those were the two sort of back to back.
Yeah, okay.